Whispers in the Glass, Part 1, Arrival. The road wound through the autumn forest like a forgotten thread, having lost its beginning and end. The leaves had already turned shades of copper and red, and the wind scattered them as if some invisible hand were tossing logs into the air for yet another playful fire. Daniel Moore sat behind the wheel of an old Ford, catching himself thinking that the road resembled his own life. There seemed to be a direction, but he had long ceased to be certain where he was heading. He was 28, once a gifted philosophy student in Boston, now a man without purpose, without work, without a sense that the world kept him in any orbit at all. The loss of his father a year ago had shattered him in such a way that he began to fear his own thoughts. And now, when a letter arrived from a lawyer requesting he come to his grandfather's estate, who had passed away long before, Daniel took it not as a duty, but rather as an escape. The house stood on the outskirts of a decaying town in Maine, a place where tourists do not go, where the roads are forgotten, and neighbors, if any still remained, looked at you as if you were a ghost yourself. He slowed before the wrought iron gates. A rusty sign with the almost erased name, Moore Estate, hung upon them. The sound of the engine had become too much when he turned it off. The silence of the forest proved louder than the noise. "Well," he whispered, "let's see what you're hiding." The gates gave way surprisingly easily, as if someone had been waiting for him. The estate loomed as a dark blot against the backdrop of the yellowed forest. The windows seemed like dusty eyes, watching him through the years. The roof sagged, but it had not collapsed. The house did not look dead, rather old, weary, yet stubborn in its existence. The key from the lawyer fit without any trouble. The lock creaked so loudly that Daniel flinched. Inside, the air smelled of dust, dampness, and something else, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet persistent, like a mixture of old smoke and dried flowers. He set his suitcase by the stairs and froze. It seemed as though someone had moved in the hallway, but it was only a reflection of the glass in a large mirror hanging on the opposite wall. Daniel stepped closer. His own reflection looked weary, hollow eyes, unshaven jaw, fatigue that had long become part of his facial features. But something was off. His eyes in the mirror seemed darker, deeper, as if another face stood behind them. He sharply turned away and forced a laugh. "Welcome, Daniel," he said to himself. "First 5 minutes in the house and you're already seeing ghosts. Great start." The house greeted him with silence, but it was not ordinary silence. It breathed. It seemed the walls could hear his steps, his inhales and exhales, and that they themselves recorded his presence. In the kitchen, he found an old kettle, a few plates, even some tea that probably had been sitting there for decades. When the water boiled, the window trembled, and for a moment it seemed to him that someone was standing behind him. A shadow, tall and thin. He rushed to the window, but there was only the yard littered with leaves. He turned back, poured the tea into a cup, and sat at the table. The taste was bitter, almost metallic, and yet the warmth in his stomach brought a small measure of comfort. His thoughts began to drift toward his grandfather, a man he had seen only rarely as a child, stern, silent, with a heavy gaze. Something cold always radiated from him. Back then, Daniel did not understand. Now, he tried not to think. "Why did he leave me this house?" he thought. "I was never close to him. Or maybe it's not an inheritance, but a trap. Or just a coincidence." He stood up and looked once more into the hallway mirror. It seemed to him that the reflection was now smiling. At night, the house came alive, not with sounds, but with a sensation. Daniel lay on the old bed, which miraculously still held a mattress, and listened to the floor creaking somewhere below. He heard no footsteps, yet his body said, "Someone is walking." He arose, took his phone with the flashlight, and carefully stepped into the hallway. The walls seemed closer than during the day. The mirror drew his gaze again. He raised the flashlight and almost dropped it. In the reflection, he saw himself, but also someone beside him, a figure in the shadows standing behind his shoulder. He whipped around, no one. When he looked back into the mirror, there was only himself. But now, the eyes in the mirror were definitely not his. They glowed with a faint, almost imperceptible fire. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "You're starting to lose your mind," he thought. But deep inside, another feeling was stirring, that it was not him, that someone was watching him through the glass. Morning came with fog. The house stood like an island in a gray sea. Daniel stepped onto the porch, and his gaze fell on a feminine figure at the edge of the yard. She was in a dark coat with a scarf over her head. She stood motionless, looking directly at him. "Hey," he shouted, "who are you?" The woman stepped closer. Now he could see her face, stern, with sharp features. "You're Moore," she said. Her voice was low, almost hoarse. "The grandson of old Henry." "Yes," he replied cautiously. "And you?" "Clara Hayes. I live nearby." The only one still left in this cursed village. He clenched his jaw. "It's my house. My grandfather left it to me." "House?" she said sarcastically. "This is not a house, boy. This is a trap of glass and shadows. Your grandfather knew, but left it to you. Maybe as a curse." He felt the words cut into his nerves. "I don't believe in fairy tales." Clara shook her head. "In this place, you'll soon learn to believe, because here it's either you believe or you vanish." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone on the porch. Daniel looked at the house. The windows gleamed with the gray light, as if listening to their conversation. And then, for the first time, he felt it. This house was alive. Part 2. Dreams and Shadows. Night fell quickly like a dark fabric covering the house from all sides. Daniel lay in bed, listening to the wind whispering through the cracks of the old windows. At first, it was only sounds, creaks, rustling, a light tapping on the roof. Then it seemed to him that the house was breathing along with him, matching the rhythm of his heart with its invisible lungs. He closed his eyes, trying to fall asleep, and suddenly entered a dream. Not a dream, but rather a state between sleep and reality. There in the half-darkness stood his grandfather, only not the one he remembered from childhood. This one was elongated, almost transparent, and his eyes glowed with a cold yet familiar light. "Daniel," his grandfather spoke, and the voice echoed from all directions, as if the room held hundreds of mirrors. "Daniel, you came here because you seek answers, but are you ready to hear them?" Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "Grandpa, are you real?" he asked, though he knew there would be no ordinary answer. "Real," his grandfather repeated. "Which of us is real? You are here, and I am here."
Or are you merely a shadow in this house? The words cut through his consciousness like a sharp knife. He understood that the house felt his doubts, his guilt, his fear. Nothing could be hidden here. Awakening, Daniel sat on the bed for a long time. The morning light barely pierced through the panes. It seemed that the dream had left him with more than just a memory. He felt his grandfather's presence even on days when everything should have been solid and real. He went down to the kitchen, but everything had changed there too. The kettle he had left the night before was already hot, as if someone had turned it on. The plates shone not with dust, but with something else, a barely noticeable light. He stopped, trying to understand whether the dream was continuing or if the house had come alive. No, he muttered to himself. I'm just tired. But the feeling that someone stood behind him did not leave him. He turned sharply and saw only shadows gliding along the walls. Gradually, the house began to reveal its secrets. The mirrors reflected not only his own face. Several times, Daniel noticed figures appearing in the reflection that were not standing before him, silhouettes of people long dead or those he had never seen. Their movements were slow, as if they were trying to say something, but their language was beyond words. He began recording everything in a notebook, details that seemed impossible to forget, phrases that echoed in his mind, as if the house itself had decided to teach him something. Fear is only the beginning, he wrote, and guilt is the door. Night followed night, the dreams became brighter and more unsettling. His grandfather no longer merely spoke, they showed him rooms that physically did not exist in the house, corridors stretching endlessly, glass surfaces reflecting the sky and earth, but not real, distorted, dark. In one such nocturnal journey, Daniel stood in a vast hall, its walls mirrored. Shadows glided across them, forming faces and hands that begged for help or laughed at him. He tried to scream, but his voice was only an echo in the mirrors. "Why are you afraid?" his grandfather asked. "Fear is your own voice, your own shadow. It has always been with you." Daniel felt his heart constrict. He understood that the house did not merely reflect his fears, it fed on them. The more he feared, the stronger the shadows became. The days grew increasingly gloomy. Fog wrapped the area around the estate, and Daniel could barely see the boundary between earth and sky. He tried to communicate with Clara, but their meetings were brief and her words mysterious. Do not seek answers outside yourself. Here, the house is not just a home. It is a mirror of your soul. He did not understand immediately, but gradually her words settled in his mind like stones at the bottom of a river. Each thought became heavy, each decision difficult. He felt guilt for the life he had not lived, for the people he had left behind, for the opportunities that had disappeared, and the shadows seemed to know it all. They laughed, whispered, and sometimes just stood silently watching him struggle with himself. One night, Daniel awoke with the feeling that someone was sitting on his bed. His heart pounded, cold pierced his body. He raised his eyes and saw his grandfather. But this time he was not transparent. His body had weight, his eyes burning, and his lips whispered, "Come," to the mirror. Daniel rose, feeling as if he were taking steps he did not control. He approached the large mirror in the hall. The reflection showed himself, but the eyes were foreign. The shadow he saw looked at him through the reflection, and he felt fear and curiosity merge into an unstoppable force. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I am you," the voice answered. "You do not yet know yourself. Here you will learn." Daniel felt the darkness begin to pull him inward. He wanted to retreat, but his legs did not obey. And then he realized, for the first time, the boundaries between him and the house, between dream and reality, between life and death, were fading. Shadows glided, mirrors flickered, and the house stood silent, waiting for him to take his next step.
Part 3. Shadows come alive. The next night was quiet only at first glance. Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling cracked with age. It seemed to him that all the sounds were concentrated here, in his room. Creaks, rustlings, and light tapping around the bed created the feeling of an invisible observer's presence. He turned over, closed his eyes, and saw his grandfather again. Only this time, his figure was brighter, sharper, with a face radiating cold determination. "Daniel," the voice spoke, both sounding and not sounding at once, "you are no longer an observer. You are part of this place, and it is part of you." Daniel felt his heart tighten and his mind tried to flee. He rose and walked into the hallway. The mirror before him no longer merely reflected the room. In its glass, shadows danced as if alive, and among them, his own, moving independently of him. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, but the answer came not in words. The shadows twisted, swirled, and one of them stepped forward, taking his shape, only distorted, with eyes flickering in the darkness. Daniel felt a chill pierce his spine. He wanted to scream, but his voice stuck in his throat. The shadow approached, and he saw for the first time that it was not just a reflection. It had weight, moving slowly but confidently. "It is me," the shadow whispered, "the part of you you have always feared to see." The old house began to react to his fear. The creaks became voices, whispering his name. The mirrors glimmered, not from light, but from an inner glow. And the more he tried to look away, the stronger they appeared, drawing from his subconscious everything he had hidden: guilt, doubts, memories of loss and mistakes. He found himself in a large hall. The ceiling hung low, and mirrored walls created endless reflections. The shadows began to move, merging into large figures that mirrored his movements, but always a step ahead. "You are afraid because you cannot forgive yourself," his grandfather said in the dream. "Every fear is a door, every guilt is a key." Daniel felt the world tighten around him. His own reflection shattered into countless faces, each gazing at him with accusation. He realized that the house was not just a place, it was a mirror of his soul, a space where all hidden corners were revealed and brought to life. In the morning, he awoke with a cold face, his hands sticky from sleep. But this was no ordinary dream. On the floor of the room lay a small shard of glass, which he had certainly not left there the night before. His heart pounded, but he knew this was a sign. He stepped onto the porch and saw Clara. Her eyes, stern and penetrating, looked at him as if she already knew everything. "What is happening?" he asked. "You are awakening it," she said calmly. "The house has always been alive, but not everyone alive here has good intentions. Now it knows your heart, and it reacts." Daniel felt a heaviness in his chest. He wanted to run, but his body would not obey. "It shows me," he tried to understand, "my fears. More than fears, it shows you your essence and what you have hidden even from yourself." He looked at the estate again. The windows glimmered with a gray light. He felt, this time, the house was not merely watching, it was influencing. The following days passed in silence and tension. Daniel watched the mirrors, his own reflections, which began doing things he had not done. He wrote in his notebook, "Here I am not only myself. Here I am all those I feared to be. Here my shadows live their own lives." One evening he met Clara in the hallway. "You must understand one thing. If you let fear control you, it will consume you. The shadows are only a tool. You decide whether to remain part of this nightmare." Daniel pondered. He knew he was standing at the edge, between reality and nightmare, between life and death, between himself and the darkness.
He sat in the mirrored room and stared at his reflection. The shadow stood beside him, watching him struggle with himself. "Now, the choice is yours," his grandfather said in the dream. "Everything depends on this choice." And Daniel realized for the first time, fear is not the enemy. Fear is a guide, and the house, a mirror of his soul, waits for the brave to show who he truly is.
Part 4. The Choice. Night fell on the estate quickly, a thick, dark blanket. Fog rolled across the yard, creeping up to the porch like a living organism. Daniel stood before the large mirror in the main hall. His own reflection was mutilated. The eyes glowed from within, and shadows emerged from the sides, moving independently as if alive. "Now everything becomes clear," his grandfather's voice spoke in his mind. "Everything you feared, everything you hid, it's all here now." Daniel felt the cold wrap around his heart and realized he was standing on the edge between himself and darkness, between reality and nightmare. Every step in this house no longer belonged solely to him, yet at the same time belonged only to him. Suddenly, the mirrors trembled. The shadows came alive, emerging from the glass. They were no longer just reflections. They touched the air, constricted his chest, whispered murmurs of fear and guilt. Daniel felt the ground beneath his feet sway. "I am not afraid of you," he whispered to himself, "or at least I will try not to be." The shadows paused, seemingly listening. "You can run," his grandfather's voice said, "but fleeing will not save you. This house, these mirrors, they are part of you. Only acceptance brings freedom." Daniel took a deep breath and looked at his reflection. He saw everything he had hidden from himself: doubts, guilt, fears, regrets for lost time and unfulfilled dreams. And the shadows standing around him now were not enemies, but mirrors of his soul. "Very well," he said quietly. "If this is me, then so be it." In that moment, the mirrors gleamed. The shadows began to dance, merging with his own image. Daniel felt himself grow lighter, as if shedding fear and guilt. Yet at the same time, he sensed that a part of him remained within these walls, these shadows, these glass surfaces. He no longer tried to push them away. He simply watched them come alive, recognizing them as part of himself. The house breathed with him, and for the first time in many years, Daniel felt inner peace. Morning came with fog and the sun breaking through the clouds. The mirrors no longer flickered, the shadows retreated, but the sense of presence remained. Daniel stepped onto the porch and met Clara. Her gaze, stern and penetrating, seemed even more understanding. "You did it," she said softly. "Now you see that fears and guilt are only parts of you. And the house, it waits not for you, but for your understanding." He nodded. "I understand. It's not cursed. It's a mirror. And if I accept myself, it cannot consume me." She shook her head. "And if you do not accept it, you will become part of it forever." He felt a slight chill on his back, and the shadows flickering down the corridor reminded him that choice was always near. But now he knew control is not in fighting fear, but in embracing it. The following days passed strangely fast. Daniel walked through the estate, observing the mirrors, but now they were different. They no longer frightened, whispered, or haunted. They simply reflected light, shadows, and his own gaze that had finally stopped trembling from fear. He recorded everything he felt, from fear to awareness, from loneliness to inner peace. Each phrase in his notebook was like a small step toward himself, a small victory over his own darkness.
One evening, Daniel sat by a large window. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the fog still lingered over the yard. The mirrors reflected the sky and his reflection simultaneously. And for the first time he felt the shadows had not vanished. They had always been here, but now he could coexist with them. Perhaps, he thought, the world does not need saving. Perhaps one only needs to learn to accept oneself and one's fears. The window opened to a gentle breeze. Leaves rustled, and the house seemed quiet, alive, and serene. Daniel understood he had not defeated the shadows. He had become part of them, but had not been consumed. He had learned to look into the mirror and see himself, not fear. The shadows still moved, still whispered, but now they were not commands, not threats, but the voices of his own soul. And Daniel felt that he had finally become free in this house, which had taught him the most important lesson of all: to accept the darkness, not to hide from himself, and not to fear his own reflection.